Well, welcome everyone to the Australian Science Communicators Career Night. Over the last, I'm not sure how many years we're up to now as history of Ask. I should, because I do remember it started in 1994. So if we subtract 1994 from 2022, someone better than me can do the maths, but it's 20, no, that must be 28 years. We've had a number of science communication careers nights within states, nationally, and so on. But I think this might be maybe the first that's been online. And so I certainly welcome you to our careers night today. Before I get started, I'm currently working and staying on North Stradbroke Island. And so I'd like to do a traditional welcome to country. So I acknowledge the Gurunpul, Nudji and Nunukul First Nation people of the Quandamooka region and who are the traditional owners of this land. I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Now you're all probably on different First Nations lands. Feel free to put your welcome to country in the chat and share it with everyone else so that we know what country you're coming from and can celebrate the diversity of First Nations cultures around this wonderful nation of ours. Now, we've got 4 people to speak to you briefly tonight to give you a glimpse of their career and to answer questions with regards to science communication. I have labelled without their knowledge. I've given them each a label. So we're going to hear from the academic, the freelancer, the ambassador, and possibly the bureaucrat if he joins us. I'll introduce each of those people a little bit later. But after they've spoken, we'll have about 20 minutes for questions. And for those questions, please put them in the chat. Put them in the chat anytime during the meeting, and we'll try to address them in that 20 minutes. But after that 20 minutes, you've got a chance to have a much more intimate conversation with the panelists and myself when we go into breakout rooms, when you can turn your camera on, you can turn on your microphone, and you can ask questions. And we'll do that in 2 lots of 10 minutes sessions. So there's lots of opportunities to ask questions and to have an interaction with the people that are in the room. Before I introduce our panelists and start with the first panelist, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have been a science communicator for some 33 years. Started off at CSIRO after a career as a scientist and a journalist. And in many ways, it combined both of those passions. When I started, the term science communication really wasn't known. But now it's very common. We have people advertising for science communicators, but I think it means many different things to many different people. And I've recently written an article published in the Journal of Science Communication about the messiness, the glorious, wonderful messiness of science communication, which relates both to the research and the practice of it. To give you a little bit of a glimpse of my career, I'm going to tell you about the hardest thing I've ever done, the weirdest thing I've ever done, and the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And then we'll get each of the panelists to do the same. So first of all, the hardest thing I've ever done. I was a number of years ago, I was asked to run a communication planning workshop with a very diverse group of people who were starting a new centre of research. It included people who were farmers, pastoralists, who were involved in mining, and it included Indigenous people along with scientists and government land managers. So a very diverse group. And as part of that process of developing a communication plan for the centre, I had a listening session where I had invited an Indigenous woman elder to talk about what she thought should be a focus of communication for the new centre. However, one of the Indigenous male elders thought that I hadn't followed protocol and hadn't had that approved by him and others. And he is and was a very influential man in Indigenous politics and affairs, and set about after that to undermine everything I was trying to do. Well, it was a really hard situation, but I learned two things from that. And one is that I was actually, the organisation didn't have the money for me to talk to people before the workshop session. And I usually like to talk to people beforehand to find out where they're at, where they're coming from, what they want to get out of the session. And that wasn't possible. And I think that would have made a big difference. So that was the first thing, to always insist on that listening process. The second thing that I learned out of that was to be willing to change. And so the workshop that happened wasn't the one that I planned. It didn't develop a communication strategy like we hoped, but it did help the centre to progress and to think about their goals amongst a mix of stakeholders. So that was the hardest time. The weirdest time was when I was with a bunch of wonderful young biologists on top of Hinchinbrook Island, where we got helicoptered in, a bit like James Bond, through the mist to the tops of Hinchinbrook Island, which is just north of Townsville. And they were doing flora fauna surveys that have never been done on those remote parts of the island. And I went out one night with a group of the scientists along a creek, spotlighting and looking at frogs that were in the creek. When I got back to the campsite, my eye felt a little bit funny and scratchy. And I discovered I had a small black leech in it. And so I wanted to pull it out, but the research leader said, no, you can't pull it out because it'll just go behind your eyeball. And so I had to wait until it filled with blood and dropped out automatically before I could do anything about that. So that was extremely weird. And it happened 2 more times over the course of that expedition. But it was such a wonderful, wonderful trip. And it was being with people who are passionate about the environment and exploring the environment and telling their story and helping to tell their story through live satellite radio interviews, TV and video filmmaking was a real privilege. And lastly, my most rewarding, and some of you may have heard me talk about this, was that I was privileged for 6 years to work with a group of 45 farmers from around Australia in all different types of enterprises, from beekeeping to very broad scale beef production, along with about half a dozen climate and agricultural scientists, to look at managing climate risk. And it was so rewarding to see relationships of trust develop between the scientists and the farmers, and to see real changes happen. And I think as a science communicator, when you see those positive changes in people's lives and their livelihoods, it is extremely rewarding. So that's a glimpse into my scientific career. But let me introduce the first person on our panel, which is a good friend of mine who I haven't seen for a few years, Dr. Cobi Calyx. Now, Cobi has a mix of backgrounds from journalism, law, communication and science. She's currently working for the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales as a postdoctoral fellow. And after she graduated from a PhD at ANU like me. And so over to you, Cobi, to give us a little bit of a glimpse into your life as an academic, a researcher and a teacher.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, as you mentioned, I could have fit the various roles that you've separated us for into at various times in my career. And my brief was to kind of give a bit of a background onto my career. So rather than talking about being an academic per se, I thought I'd give a bit of an overview as to the various SciComm things that I've been involved with along the way. Depending on your background, my last name is pronounced Calyx. I won't hold it against you. Calyx is in itself a science communication thing. I'll let you guys Google what Calyx means. Americans do say Calyx. And some Sydney-siders, now that the Calyx is open, do too. So yeah, my original background, well, even that's not so straightforward. I mean, my first ever job was working in a surf shop, okay, when I was a teenager. But then I did a journalism degree, even though I'd done really well. I'd topped the state in biology and social studies, but I didn't want to be a lab scientist. So I ended up doing journalism, but doing biology and chemistry as well within my undergrad degree, which didn't make any sense because you don't get any credit for doing science within a humanities degree. So I ended up dropping some of that and doing a double degree with international relations because I thought I would like to go and do cool stuff around the world. And then in my last year of my journalism degree, I got a job with the ABC. So then I started working for the ABC. I'd already worked in community radio and for an environmental newspaper and stuff like during my degree as well. So I did that for about 18 months. And then I kind of wanted to go deeper into things, and I wanted to start specializing more in science and health and environmental communication stuff. So a theme of throughout my career is basically doing different contracts and kind of getting to the end of a contract and then going, okay, well, now's the time to decide if I want to keep doing this or doing something else. I think that's a generational thing, right? I feel like there's baby boomers who just did the same thing for their whole lives, but I feel like a lot of science communication jobs are either contract or freelance or casual or whatever. So for me, part of the reason I've done so many different things in my career is because I'd kind of do this contract and be like, right, I'm going to do a really good job on this thing, and then get to this point and decide what's next. So that's it. Like I had a full-time, so I have some friends still in the ABC now. And I think had I been on a, in some permanent ABC job, I'd probably still be in the ABC now. But because I was on contracts, at the end of one contract, I went overseas. And before I went overseas, I'd lined up a job with the University of Adelaide because I'm based on Ghana country, as I said in the chat. So yeah, I took a job with the University of Adelaide before I went overseas. So I packed up, I was working as an ABC regional journalist. I left my apartment, went overseas for a while on the scholarship thing, came back, and then got a call from the ABC saying, oh, you want your next contract, right? Because people don't really leave the ABC once they do a journalism degree, like if they're young. And I was like, if you offered it to me before I went, then I would have taken another contract, but it's too late. I've already accepted this job at Uni Adelaide. So I moved back to Adelaide, and I worked as the communications officer for a genomics center, one of these research centers in one of these comms roles, which was great in that I got to really delve into it and kind of become like a bit of an expert in genomics at the time, which is one of those areas that's moved on a lot kind of in the intervening years anyway. And then wanted to move overseas. Pretty much my goal in my late teens and early 20s was just to get paid to travel. So then I took a working holiday visa, moved to the UK, and moved to Cambridge in the UK, and then basically did a couple of years of freelance and in-house science communication in various capacities there, including working for the Science and Development Network, which I loved. So I really like science and development. And the themes today about kind of inclusion and diversity, that's been kind of a theme in my career since I started in science communication. Then when my working holiday visa ran out, I came back to a promotion at Uni Adelaide. So then I was a communications manager. And at that time is when I started my PhD at ANU Centre for the Public Awareness of Science. Being in Cambridge for a couple of years, I had pretty bad imposter syndrome. And I was like, okay, maybe if I go back and get a PhD in science, then I won't have that anymore. It didn't work at all. Just so you know, it doesn't matter how qualified you get. Those kind of things are not necessarily going to go away. Although I do really like having a gender neutral pronoun now. So during my PhD, I became one of the first people employed through the Inspiring Australia initiative that continues today, based in the Science Exchange and the Royal Institution of Australia. That was before they had managers in most states. And I ended up leaving that job because I, again, reached the end of a contract, wanted to renegotiate my salary and say, okay, you're now paying this person Sydney this much. So I have a year of experience now, you should pay me that much. And they're like, oh yeah, but you're based in a charity, so we can't. And so I walked. I was like, well, that's not fair. I'm quitting or I'm not accepting a contract extension if you're not going to match my salary. So I left. And I just moved to Melbourne and freelanced for a while. And I'd kind of applied for a couple of things to wait and see what would happen next. And then I became an Australian Youth Ambassador for International Development through the Australian Aid Program. Sorry.
I might get you to just wrap it up so we can move on.
I have already gone 5 minutes. I thought, yes. All right. So then I was an AAD in Asia for a year. We started working for Uni Melbourne. Then I went to work for the United Nations in Geneva. I was based inside CERN, so at the Large Hadron Collider, but I was working for UNOSAT on satellite stuff. And that was really cool. And I'm really glad that I did that. And that started my work in satellite stuff and Earth observation stuff. I continue now. Went back to Uni Melbourne, went to Vanuatu to be a technology trainer. And then I started working in government. And then I spent a couple of years working in government, and then I got headhunted by UNSW. And I've just shifted over from CSI to the Environment and Society program in UNSW. Again, change of contracts. So yeah, that's me in a very brief, less than 5 minutes, it feels like, but maybe it's more than.
Thank you very much, Cobi. I must say I feel a little exhausted following your career. Although I guess as a person who runs my own science communication business like you, I run from one contract to another. Although I have multiple contracts all at the same time as well, which can make it very confusing. But we'll obviously ask a little bit more about your interesting mix of practice and research a little bit later on. But let me introduce our second speaker this evening, and that's Mike McRae. He's our freelancer, and he's been writing for science for over a decade, working at wonderful places like CSIRO, ABC, and the Australian Museum. So welcome, Mike, and tell us some more about your career.
Thanks, Jenny. You're probably going to hear a lot of the same theme tonight of people who kind of take on jobs in science communication and take on contracts and move from one job to the next. So I'll try to give the briefest synopsis I can of my travels. I guess we're starting way back in high school. I had a love of art and writing and science and couldn't decide really which way to go in life. I had a bit of feedback from a teacher in that time that put me off writing for a number of years. And so I never saw myself as a writer. Saw myself as a scientist instead. I did a uni degree in biotechnology many years ago, and that took me into pathology. So I worked in a hospital for a number of years, diagnosing blood, whatever, and you name a bodily fluid, and I played with it basically. So I did that for a while, and I found myself kind of at a point where I don't think I could have progressed into any other position, which I could enjoy as much as what I was doing. I was working with patients. I was taught phlebotomy, so I'd be actually taking the bloods. And there was something about working with patients and hearing their fears and concerns about science and medicine. And they'd be asking you questions about medicine and, what's wrong with them? Why do they feel this way? And they're not getting clear answers from the doctors or from the emergency staff that are there. And it showed me that I think my main area was wanting to communicate how medicine worked, how does science work on that level. So I moved from that into education, and I did that, taught for a number of years. A bit like Cobi, I've been all over the place. I went to the UK as well for a number of years and taught over there. But my true love of writing was always in the background. The education system burns you out very quickly, and I wanted to make for educational resources. So I did the Science Circus in 2006 as a bit of a stepping stone between the two careers, and ended up working for the CSIRO for about 7 years on their children's publications. So I wrote a small weekly email called Science by Email for a number of years, and I worked with the staff there on their magazines and just making little hands-on activities and writing articles and doing whatever needed doing, flitting from one project to another within the education group. Got to the end of that, went back into teaching, did that for a year just to keep my hands on education, ended up working then in Sydney for an education group called 3P, who made a program called Mathletics. But I worked on the science side of that, still staying in the curriculum and science areas. Eventually went back into to freelancing in science. So written a couple of books over the years. One kind of on the psychology of science and history of science, another one on definition of what a disease is. But these days I'm the deputy editor for Science Alert, which is one of, if not the largest science news service in the world in terms of traffic. So we're doing pretty well these days. And my freelancing probably isn't quite what it was. I tend to focus mostly on Science Alert these days, but went through a while there of pretty much freelancing myself out, contracting to pretty much all different organizations and groups, writing whatever articles needed doing. So yeah, that's kind of the career trajectory. I mean, obviously there's a lot of details of why I moved from one thing to another throughout that and what precipitated certain events through that. But driving it all, I think, has always just been that desire to take complicated science find a way that I can understand it myself and find, I think, the narrative in it that communicates with a particular audience. Every job I've had, every freelancing opportunity I've had has all been about finding a particular audience and learning a bit about them and then shaping whatever the information is to suit them. And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges, but also the biggest reward is understanding what it is, whether it's a patient, whether it's a student, whether it's a faceless audience I'm never going to meet, learning a little bit about them, about what they want to know and how they want to know it, and then shaping information to suit them.
Thank you very much, Mike. So did I get that wrong? You're no longer a freelancer.
No, I mean, as of about a month ago, I actually so I probably should update some of my materials, but I still freelance technically. So there are still groups I write for. I still regularly do things for an online education company called ClickView. They do videos and things like that. I do teacher's guides still for the CSIRO. But I've reduced it down a lot because these days, pretty much it's a full-time job being deputy editor for Science Alert. So that has wound down a little bit.
It's great to hear Science Alert is going from strength to strength. I think it has boomed initiative.
Pretty much past year. So I'm not sure if I'm letting too much of a cat out of the bag, but we pretty much are in terms of traffic among the top, if not the top, sort of science news services in the world now.
That's fabulous. Congratulations. And I guess we'll have some questions about that, reminding everyone that if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So far, all I see is that Tom recommends I wear goggles when I go out frogging to avoid those leeches from getting in my eyes. It's a good idea, actually. I never even thought of that. Simple solution. Let me introduce our third speaker this evening, and I think she may be our youngest. Tanaya Joshi is the Impact and Communication Officer at Earthwatch Australia, one of my favourite organisations. I've actually been on 2 Earthwatch expeditions, although now a long time ago. I studied sea otters in Alaska, and I did the Kimberley turtles in northwestern Australia. So wonderful experiences. And I was just thinking the other day, I need to go and do another one. But Tanaya, you've had a mix of different experiences already, even though you're young. So I'll hand it over to you to tell us some more.
Thanks, Jenny. You're lucky. I haven't been able to go on an Earthwatch trip yet because COVID has wrecked all of my dreams and hopes. But I think we're starting back up. Just this morning, we were having a meeting about putting expeditions back on sale. So there'll definitely be emails and social media coming out about trips that everyone can go on to immerse themselves in nature a little bit more. Thanks so much for having me, everyone. I've been sitting here listening to Cobi and Mike and feeling a little bit like a fangirl because they have so many things that they've done that are just, a dream to me to be able to do those things. And then also I've been hearing a lot of similarities from the things that interest us, which is so nice to hear. So yeah, my name is Tanaya. I'm coming to you from Launceston today on Stony Creek People's Country. I'm normally on Wurundjeri land, but I'm just traveling for work today. What I might do is just provide a little bit of context before I go into my background. So I am working at the moment in science communication, but it's not because I have any particular qualification in science communications. I did my undergraduate in straight science, and then I just finished my master's in environment and sustainability. So I don't have formal writing training, but I've always been a lover of talking, of chatting, of writing, and of communicating. So much like Mike, I was sitting, when I had to put my degrees up for selection in year 12, wondering, gosh, what should I do? Should I do an arts degree? I really like that. But should I do a science degree? Surely that's a bit more useful. And so I went with the science degree, but the whole time I was doing internships alongside. So I've done a few different internship stints, but I do have to say that the reason I even learned about science communication, which is a little bit different from Cobi and Mike's and Jenni's stories, is that it was actually a pretty popular term back when I was graduating. So I attended a little nerd camp called the National Youth Science Forum at the start of Year 12, which is held in Canberra. And it is truly a joy to be surrounded by like-minded sciencey nerds. And on the final night of that experience, it was like a 2-week-long camp. I was sitting at a dinner table at the awards ceremony part of the night. And I was sitting next to someone from an ARC research centre. And I was just talking to them about my aspirations. And I was like, I like this, I like that. But they sound like two very different things, because in Western education, the sciences and the arts tend to be very polarised. And so she said to me, what about science communication? And I was like, what's that? And so I learned about it very early on, and I was very lucky to have found it as a core calling of my career really, really early on. And so when I went into my undergraduate degree, I always had plans to do something alongside it. And so I did a few different internships, initially at one place called Science in Public, which is right next to Science Works in Melbourne. And that's training up scientists to be able to speak to the media. Then I did a few digital media and social media internships at the Social Science and a place which is called Opal. So they do specifically clinical trials for people and try and communicate that science to people who want to understand a little bit more about what's involved in the trial. And so, Mike, when you were talking about the medical space, my ears were like pointing up, because that's exactly what I love doing. I love translating that science and making it a bit more accessible to someone who might have fears or concerns about what a particular device or drug is going to do. And from there on, I went on to work with Joanna and Tom at Pint of Science. So I volunteered as the National Media Coordinator, which is probably my hardest thing, to be honest, one of my hardest things, because I hadn't had experience coordinating media at all. But Joanna and Tom trusted me. And so I went on to try and coordinate some journalists to come along to Science in the Pub type events. And now I work in impact and communications at Earthwatch. So the whole reason I got the job is because it had a byline that said, do you like shouting out about science? And I certainly like to do that. I'm doing it at the dinner table. I'm doing it at any event I go to. I'm doing it in the street if I could. I love shouting out about science and the good that it does. And so I now work at this research charity, which empowers people to save nature. So we basically get people out into the field with a scientist for a couple of weeks doing some heavy lifting research. So that can involve diving down into the Great Barrier Reef and weeding corals of seaweed. Or it could be going out to the Bahamas and swimming with the turtles and measuring them to see the wildlife distribution. And my job is basically to translate that science and help sell our expeditions, but also help promote our scientists.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Sorry, Tanaya, sorry. That happens when you get to a certain age, something to look forward to. I think you were well named as the ambassador.
Was that me? Okay, I was trying to figure out which category I was.
Shows that you really are out there, enthusiastic and doing some wonderful things in communicating about science. So looking forward to questions, which I've just reminded everyone, don't forget to put your questions in the chat. But let me turn to our last speaker, who I've called the bureaucrat. Hopefully he doesn't mind. But he has spent 20 years in government, and he's currently heads the energy division at the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Welcome, Duncan McIntyre, to tell us about your science communication career. And I want to know why you've got a passion for balls of flaming cornflower. So maybe you'll explain that.
Well, that one's easy, and I think many of your members might understand why that is. Look, I'm delighted to come and talk to you, and I've been a science communicator all my career, but I've applied it in a little bit of a different way to the way some of you might think. Nonetheless, many of the people who I've been trained with end up doing as diverse things as I have done with the background. So I've been involved in science communication since I had a passion for science at school, and in fact, as a teenager, I was an explainer in the old Questacon. For those of you who know Questacon, that used to be in the old Ainslie School. And then when I was at university, I had a lecturer who was involved with the Questacon Science Circus, and she got me interested in that, and I did the Science Circus in '96, and then I ran it as a coordinator in '98. A few years later, I've continued to stay in touch with science and science communication, but as a coordinator, I got to see that bureaucrats do a lot of very interesting work, and quite different from perhaps what I had thought when I was at university. And you have a real opportunity to influence Australian society, but also to use these communication skills, because a key thing that has been important to me and has been part of my success as a bureaucrat has been my ability to understand difficult technical issues that are often science issues and translate them in a way that can help them be understood by our stakeholders, and most particularly by ministers, to help them make sensible decisions. So over my career, I've been responsible for things like the National Broadband Network at one point. I've looked at types of technology like cloud computing and the use of data in government. I've also, for a period of time, been the person in charge of Questacon and science in government, and had the opportunity to brief ministers on those issues. But through all of those different roles, I guess the theme has been being able to quickly understand technical audiences and technical material and extract the important value out of it and communicate that in a variety of forms. Sometimes it's press releases, sometimes it's submissions to cabinet, and sometimes it's giving talks at conferences or convening large meetings. But the skills you learn as a science communicator are central to the sort of work we do as bureaucrats. And I'm constantly frustrated by those of my colleagues that don't have that kind of background, and therefore who don't recognise that they're not hitting the mark with their audience. But as a result of my training as a science communicator, I find that consistently ministers understand the key points they need to think about, and as a result, I can be influential in helping them make good decisions. So I'd encourage you to think broadly about what you learn as a science communicator and the role of science in society. And I see it as a core skill that really benefits bureaucrats. A number of former people who went through sort of science communication courses have ended up working in government. I have a number of former Science Circus members who are in different departments around town, and the skills are really, really valuable to the sort of work that you end up doing in government.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Another completely different perspective. I might ask the organisers to add on the rest of our panellists so that we can answer some questions. I've already got questions in the chat, and we also received some questions beforehand. So I'm going to start with one of the questions that we received beforehand, which is related to a question that Tom's also put on the chat. And that is, did any of you specifically study science communication? I know myself, I didn't. I have 2 undergraduate degrees, one in journalism and one in science. 2 full undergraduate degrees, not joint degrees, 2 complete full undergraduate degrees. And I have joined those together to do science communication. And then a lot has been learnt actually on the job. So I can see people nodding or shaking their head. Mike, have you had formal training in science communication?
The closest I've done is the Science Circus. So I did that in 2006 in terms of explicit trying your hand, which is I'd probably say that when I did it was less training and more like a sampler. You got to kind of try your hand at things. Do you like talking in front of public? Do you like going on radio? The best thing about that was less the training and more the networking and the meeting of people and joining an alumni that were very supportive. You go and say to anybody, I'm ex-Science Circus. And it opens doors for you to try your hand at things. Probably the only other thing that helped, well, it wasn't explicitly science communication, is I did a master's degree in the culture of health and medicine, which helped me kind of combine what I knew from a biomedical side of things. So, you know how science works. But one thing we're not taught a lot about is how to understand the culture of science and how it varies. Now, understanding of things we take for granted varies. So I think actually understanding the culture of health and medicine, how it changes ever, probably did more for me in terms of science communication and helping me understand through a gateway that there's new things to learn, and then I could go and do that myself. So that's the closest thing I have.
Okay, Cobi, were you a Questacon kid too?
No, so I was
you weren't.
past my PhD.
Right.
But I've been involved in designing some courses, like some postgrad and undergrad science communication courses within other degrees, which is definitely a thing now that didn't used to be a thing, I guess. So I have 2 undergrads, but both in humanities, even though I did science in both. Then I have grad certs in health promotion and education. Education more recently, like paid by through the university. And then, yeah, my PhD, which is technically just in science, like even though it was in science communication. Well, it was actually more in governance and science stuff. So yeah, again, I agree with Mike. Like I would say that certainly the Questacon Science Circus is kind of like one of the most high profile forms of science communication training in Australia. So that's something that you're like, kind of, but it was more just opportunities to practice. And I do think that's true, that I think that science communication is one of those things that you don't have to study necessarily. And that, saying that as someone who's like designed some courses, but yeah, certainly like if you can do a science degree and do some science communication courses within that. So like that's the UNSW science structure, is like do a science degree and you can do some science communication courses within it. I definitely think that's fine. I don't think that we're like in Europe, for example, where people kind of feel like they need to go and do like one of the masters in science communications to get in the door.
Yeah, Joanna asked an interesting question, which maybe Tanaya or Duncan, you could talk about, and that is doing a SciComm degree helpful though? So Duncan, I can see you're going to unmute yourself, so you can go first.
Sure. Well, look, first of all, I'd say I suspect that science communicators are wandering souls who are good at integrating things that other people see as distinct, and who are curious about a range of things. Certainly that permeates the, that's the upbeat way to talk about my university training. I did 2 years of mechanical engineering, and I was also at the same time interested in psychology. And so I studied psychology in the science faculty at UNSW while doing engineering, and loved it so much I ended up doing psychology. But really, I've always had there was a lot of hard science in the engineering and in my background that meant that really the psychology had a lot to do with science communication now that I look back on it. Then I did the Science Circus, and then I've also done a master's in public administration. But I guess I thought that the Science Circus and training was helpful, and I think a sampler is a good way to talk about that. But it also just helps you have the confidence that, I've done a little bit of stuff on radio, and, I sort of understand the whole waiting online, listening to the radio for 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden you're on, and then it's all over in 3 minutes. It gives you a chance to have those experiences, or not being intimidated by talking in front of 200 people when you've got to come out of another meeting and you haven't had your head in the game, but you've done it enough that you can feel okay. Or all of a sudden somebody wants you to write an article for a newsletter, and you haven't, you read a couple of copies of the newsletter, and then you've got a sense for how to do that. So it gives you that confidence to deal with a variety of different media. And I think there are other ways to get it. And I'm very skeptical about credentialism as a way of becoming competent at these sorts of things. I think you really just have to understand what's at the heart of the career, and a degree is a good way to do that. But there are other pathways to do it. And at its heart, it's about being curious and about being able to find simple ways to communicate complex things.
Tanaya, what about you? Do you wish that there had been this magical science degree when you first heard about science communication in your last year at high school?
I think if there was an undergrad science communication degree, I would 100% have done it. I remember actually halfway through my undergrad, I was chatting to someone who had done the Science Circus, and I was like, do you think this is the way to go for me? But then I took a bit of a break between undergrad and postgrad, and in that time I focused a little bit more on the technical knowledge. Oh, there you go, Tom. Maybe I was trying to play it safe and stay in Melbourne. I'm not sure.
Tom's
I'm not
put in
sure
the
if-
chat that there's an undergraduate degree at University WA, and I know that other places are looking at including subjects, at least in science communication in undergrad as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of perhaps answer Joanna's question another way. So does doing the SciComm degree help? Definitely. So for example, one of the places I really wanted to work was the Monash Climate Communication Centre. And I really admired their work, and that was one of my units that I did in my undergraduate degree. And one of my friends who recently graduated from the Science Circus got a job there. So I think the Science Circus definitely speaks for itself and opens doors, the way that a couple of people have mentioned, but I don't think it's a do it again and again, and you can try and prove yourself and self-publish online and share that on LinkedIn. Just start putting yourself out there as well, which I think will help.
Which sort of goes to my next question, which was also asked in the pre-session to the organisers, and that is, how, if you're working in the lab now, or you're working in some other job and you want to get into science communication, what's the best way of doing it? Do you go and look for a postgrad certificate or master's? What do you do to get into science communication? Now, I'll tell you what I think, and then I'll ask the panel. I think the best thing to do is what, in fact, Tanaya did, and go and volunteer and get some work experience and get some connections that way. Certainly when I ran a bigger organisation at Econnect Communication, we would often have interns, and that led to many of them having quite a rich science communication career. And I think many of those did that as work experience, unpaid, but it led to all sorts of things. So that would be my advice, and maybe combine it with doing some part-time study as well. But anyone else want to give some advice about how to get into SciComm?
Yeah,
Duncan.
I can.
Cobi and then Duncan. Yeah.
I kind of want to, so yes, it's true that a lot of SciComm work starts from either volunteering with an organisation, or like, I think if there's an organisation you want to work for, approaching them and finding out what they want and kind of, trying to do, some small piece of work that potentially is something that's mutually beneficial. Although I do want to push back a bit on the idea that people should be working for free, because I think that's a big problem in science communication. I think if it's a structured internship where, for example, it's part of a course where you're getting a certification out of it, or some other kind of qualification, then can be a good idea. But I think that part of the particularly in Australia, I think part of the challenge for the professionalization of science communication is that sense that you have to go and work somewhere for free for 5 years, across different things before you can get your foot in the door. So I really think that Australian Science Communicators as an organisation should be pushing back against the idea that science communicators should be expected to work for free to kind of get their careers. Because
that certainly wasn't what I was suggesting, Cobi.
Yeah. So I just wanted to be
suggesting short-term
particularly
work
for
experience.
Diversity. Like, not everybody is in a position to be able to do free internships. I'm interested to hear Duncan's thoughts. I certainly found that my science communication background transferred well into government. So I was working in Vanuatu and I applied for a government job in emergency services because I wanted to move back to Australia. So I wanted that stability of a proper job to move back to, and I got it. So I definitely think that having a SciComm background works really well for a range of government departments at different levels of government. So that kind of pathway is another option, but I will see what others think.
So Duncan, you wanted to say something, and then I'll ask Mike if he wants to add anything.
So I mean, first of all, the idea that things are free. I mean, I sort of agree with the point that sometimes you have to be willing to show that you're, to give things a go, because people are taking a risk when they have somebody who doesn't have experience do something, and you can lower the bar for that risk if you say, hey, I'm willing to give this a go and see if I reckon I can do this. I want to show you that I can. But you have to make sure that's time limited. And I think realistically, if you look at a huge number of professions, not just science communication, the way you get a start is by being willing to do it for not really a fair wage at the very beginning, because people have to take that risk. So, I mean, while I agree with the point that, it's important to professionalize it and expect to be compensated, I think realistically, if you've got no experience, you can get a big head start if you can find a way to volunteer or just do something perhaps a little bit less than it's really worth. I think you should just get in and do it, right? I reckon university courses of various kinds are very helpful, but they're mainly a guided way of doing what's better still done by showing initiative and just getting in and cold calling some people and being willing to offer value, and then show that you can do it well. Because if you do the first piece of work really well, then they'll say, we want more of that. And most people will want to pay you for it. And if they don't, then someone else will have seen it and they will pay you for it. So work out what you'd like to do and just give it a go, and don't worry so much about whether or not you're paid for that first thing. And if you do it well, people will want you to keep doing it and they'll pay you to do that.
Good advice, Duncan. And I must say, as someone who has managed many work experience and intern people, it's actually extremely time consuming. And if you're running a consultancy business, quite risky because they're doing work for clients. So certainly all the people who worked for me for free were soon earning money. They weren't continuing to work for free, even when they wanted to, believe it or not. Mike, do you have anything to add about that, about, you know, how you might make that move? Because you've certainly had some experience at moving around.
Yeah, I think to echo both what Cobi and Duncan have already kind of said in some ways, it's, you know, it does come down to what you want to do. SciComm is a vast, huge field. So, you know, to pick just two different ones that I've sort of done over time, if we're talking about radio, for instance, you go, I like the idea of that. Well, it's a question of what skills you have. So really there's two things you need: your skills, and you need what I call a byline, I guess, and that is some sort of CV to go, look, I'm going to give you the shortcut version of everything I've done. You want me. While it's nice to kind of say, look, if you've got the goods, people will hire you, it's not quite true. Really what it comes down to is if you've got the shorthand that you can show somebody, I've got the goods, they'll then look at you. So you need to be able to come up to somebody and say, I've written things before, here's my bylines, or I've been on radio before, I've been doing this for 10 years, here's what I've been doing. And that's a really hard thing to do in some ways, because sometimes you might need to sell yourself short a little bit and do things for free. It's not great. I don't like the idea, but people will do that. Community radio is fantastic. Go volunteer at 4ZZZ in Brisbane, for instance, or 2XX in Canberra, and just sit on the radio and get that experience up, because that looks good. When it comes to writing, same sort of deal. You find people who might want stuff, but don't sell yourself short to kind of go, I'm just going to write for anyone for free as well. So it's a tricky balance. You're trying to build up a bit of a CV there to show somebody you're capable, and it'll start to roll on itself. How to get that really depends on who you know, what doors can you knock on, who's going to give you a shot at things, and that that varies from television, radio, whatever area you're looking at.
Which leads on nicely to, there's been a few earlier questions about freelancing and how you get into it, what sort of things you need to watch out from a legal point of view, and so on. Now, I know, Cobi, you've done work as freelancer. You have as well, Mike. Tanaya, have you worked as a freelancer as well? Yeah. So I might go to you first, Tanaya. What sort of things did you need to think about and look out from with relatively little experience in the area?
Yeah, I was just about to say I'm pretty lucky that I haven't been done dirty by anyone while freelancing yet. So I currently do some freelance writing for a South Asian publication that's trying to up the media diversity in Australia and try and share some stories from South Asian perspectives. So my whole role there is science and culture writer. And the only thing that I would suggest looking out for in terms of freelancing is that because you are your own manager, you can also start, because you're passionate about it, you can start overcommitting sometimes to things. You're like, yes, I'll do this piece, and yes, I'll do that piece, and yes, I'll interview someone, and yes, I'll go out into the field. But it is freelancing, which means that sometimes it's not feasible to do it alongside everything else you've got going on. And so I would suggest just being your own manager, but managing yourself like you wouldn't manage someone else, and that thinking of their availability and time. That's the one thing I had to watch out for, and I found myself going into quite a bit.
Any other comments about freelancing, Cobi, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot harder freelancing in Australia in terms of straight up freelancing, in my experience anyway, than say in the UK, or even just going to some of, like, there's definitely a case to be made for just going to some obscure place that has interesting science or environment or health stuff going on, and then pitching things from there to publications, particularly if there's a public, like if you want to work for New Scientist or The Economist or Science and Development Network or these kind of global places, then just being the person that's there on the ground is, you know, to me, that is kind of the essence of freelancing. And I've done that a couple of times along the way, and I've really valued it. So I do think if you have the means to travel, or like if you, I didn't buy a house until I was 34. I just spent my savings like in my 20s just going different places and then getting the next bit of work to then travel to the next place. I think if you have the opportunity to do that, yeah, it's a really good idea. Yeah, there's places in Australia, so there's Cosmos and places that do accept that do pay in Australia. Yeah, sometimes it is just getting the right pitch.
Yeah. So I guess having been on both sides of the fence when it comes to freelancing, I guess there's two bits of advice I can really give. One is, if you have a specialty, if you've got a particular background, find your clients and become known in that area. So I'm really lucky that my main background in terms of education has lent itself well to pick up a large clientele that I do a lot of educational work for, and I get a reputation that way. So I have people knocking on my door to actually write them curriculum materials, to curriculum link things, to communicate science for a particular younger audience. And I just need to make sure that my work is shiny and they want me to keep coming back. The other side of things, if you want to be a bit of a generalist though, I mean, I guess speaking mainly from a writing background, since I haven't done a lot of freelancing in radio or anything, at least I haven't commissioned it myself, is learn how to pitch well and learn that the publications will want something in a very particular way. Probably the number one thing that will get your work rejected is you don't know the publication you're writing for, and you're not presenting it in a way that they will immediately pick it up, you know, and run with it. You know, you don't have a lot of time when you're sifting through pitches or looking at stuff. And if you can't see a story in it immediately, you can't see that it's going to turn into something you don't have to polish afterwards, you probably won't run with it because it's not worth your time. Whereas somebody who knows your publication well, they've written something that just goes, you're not going to, you know, require much work in this, you'll pick that up and run with it because it saves you time and effort. So yeah, they're the main two areas, I guess, is to develop a brand in one area. And if you're not going to develop a brand, then know your client, know your clients really well.
Great advice. Thanks, Mike. We're hearing a lot this evening about the importance of understanding either who you're communicating with or the client that you're working for, if it's freelance. And I think, to me, that's the number one science communication principle, is that you won't be effective, whether it's a freelancer or a science communicator, unless you understand who you're communicating with.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, Jen, like, it's one thing everyone takes home in terms of science communication. One big thing I know is from people who are in a science background who want to go into science communication, those who fail or don't do the best in that are those people who feel that they know the science really well and want to bang that drum most. What you need to do is get your head out of the science background, trust, yep, you know the science, and you need to know your audience. If you don't know the public, if you don't know the target audience, you can't shift between them, and you keep banging that science drum and treat them as people you need to decant information into, then you're probably not going to make it.
On that note, we might just finish this part of the discussion, and we're going to head into breakout rooms where you'll have the chance to turn on your camera and audio and get to know some of our panelists a little bit more and ask some more questions. And then after 10 minutes, the panelists will change rooms and you'll have an opportunity to meet the other panelists.
We're back, or at least some of us are.
Yes, I'll just wait to see. Are we all back yet, Sharana? No. Some people are talking.
Yeah, Cobi and Mike are holding their people hostage.
Oh, Cobi, why am I not surprised? Duncan, you're muted.
One thing I've definitely learned from my science communication background is brevity often gives you more communication success. You're more persuasive if you can find a way to
Absolutely.
down.
Absolutely.
I struggle with that myself, but you know, you've always got to keep it in mind. Can I find a way to say it in less words?
Yeah. Yes.
The sitting behind the Twitter account for the Academy of Science, trying to say stuff for Twitter, that made that happen for me.
Maybe if Donald Trump's unsuccessful in this tilt, he can run a course in it, because he seems to be pretty good at it. It's the one thing he's good at.
On that note, I think everyone's back, Sharana. So I will formally have a closing to this session. But I wanted to sum up 3 things that I think are important that have come out of this session. And they all start with L, because I like alliteration. And the first one is love. What I heard from our panelists and from the people that I spoke to in the breakout rooms is this love of doing science communication. And I think I've been doing it for 33 years. And one of the things that I love about it is that no 2 days are ever the same. And it's a very rewarding job in seeing people change, in seeing their environment change, in seeing policy change, in seeing all the positive things that can come out of really good science communication. So love is an important thing when we look at a science communication career. I don't think you do it for the money. The second thing that I would say is that that came out of it was the importance of links. And that is, Australian Science Communicators offers a way of linking with others, of networking. And I think the more networks you have, the better. When I went out in my own business, I think I was the first in Australia to start a science communication business in 1995, perhaps in the world. I was able to do that because I had 6 years at CSIRO where I developed a number of networks within CSIRO, but outside of CSIRO as well. And those networks, links with people in the fields that you want to work in science communication, can be enormously beneficial. And the third thing that came out of it was the importance of listening. We didn't use that word listen. We used the word understand clients, understand audiences, understand the people that we're talking to. But to be able to do that requires us to listen. And for me, listening is the most important communication skill. So to science communication, bring love, bring links, and bring listening. And I'm sure that you'll enjoy the whole process. Now, I'm going to ask you, before I thank our panelists, I'm going to ask you each to write 2 things in the chat. There's only 11 of us left. I'm going to tell you what mine is. And that is one thing that you learnt from this whole session. And the second thing, one thing you're going to do different because of the session. So one thing you've learnt and one thing you're going to do differently. So one thing I've learnt, which I keep learning, is how rich and how diverse our field is. And it was wonderful listening to 4 very different people talk about their careers. And so that's something that I learned and I keep relearning. One thing I'm going to do as a consequence of this session is that I'm reminded of the need for there to be opportunities for people to study science communication at a tertiary level. And so we've lost the courses that we've had in Queensland. And so sometime in the next few months, I'm going to go and talk to people at the University of Queensland or maybe QUT and see if we can't reignite some form of tertiary study for science communication in Queensland. So that's me. If you can put yours in the chat, that would be wonderful, because I'm hoping that this session, even though it was brief, has helped to bring change into your life like it has mine. While you're writing those things and thinking of those things, let me thank our 4 panelists. Cobi, now I'll probably say this wrong again, Cobi Calyx. And I know what a calyx is, it's to do with a plant, but you might come on and correct me. Mike McRae, thank you. Tanaya Joshi, now she had to leave early, but it was wonderful that she was able to make it while traveling for work, and she had to leave for a work dinner. And our fourth speaker, Duncan McIntyre. What a wonderful, rich, diverse group that we had. Thank you very much for joining our panel and sharing your insights with us. And lots of nice learning and action happening on the chat. So thank you everyone for sharing that, and enjoy.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, everyone. So if anyone wants to hang around, they're welcome to. And any of the panelists, please don't feel pressured to stay any longer than you are able to. I'm sure we all have different lives that we need to get to. I thought what I might do, depending, now I know Jenny has to disappear. Did you want to hang around for another 10 minutes or are you going to disappear?
I'm going to disappear, but before I do, Cobi, tell me how to pronounce your last name again and tell me what a calyx is.
No, you're totally right.
I got it right.
And yes, it's botanical and also anatomical, but it's like a cup. It's like related to the word chalice.
Yeah, the cup. Yeah,
the cup structure. So yes,
the petals are
there you go.
in,
Symbols of flower, as Janet said.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jenny and
yes.
Joanna for wrangling us.
Yeah, and should
Really.
I say a big thank you to Joanna and Tom for organising this. Well
And
done.
Tom.
A wonderful, Joanna and Tom, wonderful initiative. Well done. And I hope many more people access the recording. Bye,
Yes.
everyone.
Bye.
And I do have to go, but if I can just add, first of all, thanks for pulling this together. I think it's really important, and certainly this session's reminded me of, I think over my career, I've had at least 5 graduates of the science circus work for me at some stage. So there are a lot of people who are science communicators who work in government, but most of them didn't start by thinking about that. So I'd be delighted to be of service to this community and help your members to understand what the opportunities are in government and how you might seize them. So I've just finished by reiterating that I'm sure you can make my details available. Don't be shy, send me an email, and I'll be very happy to do what I can to help give you a successful career in government. And I remember Sue Stockelmeyer, who some of you may know, once saying that we'll know we've succeeded when we have our first Prime Minister, whoever she may be, who comes from the science communication community. So let's see whether we can
Cobi.
at some stage have that kind of success.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Duncan. Thank you, Jenny.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Cobi. I presume that's Cobi's disappearing too, or are you going to hang around?
I should probably, my partner's doing kids' bedtime. The other thing I didn't mention is I have a 2- and a 4-year-old, so I'm very much part-time at the moment.
But doing work, doing all the things.
Doing all the things, but I also want to, I guess I'm pushing back against the doing free stuff and also the feeling that you have to do all the things all the time. That's been a big learning for me over the last few years. It's like, you don't have to do all the things all the time. It took me 7 years to do my PhD in the end, because I took leave to go work at the UN because it was too good an opportunity to pass up, and I was right that I did. Same with Thailand, I feel like Mike, you've published a couple of books. I'm kind of in awe of that because I would like to publish books like that. I've edited books, but I haven't published books like that. But I feel like there's these things that are just big journeys, right? The idea that these things just happen and you got to keep doing it all at once. I feel like I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's opportunities. The hard part that I tend to find with freelancing especially is there's always that sense of you don't take an opportunity, it will never come back. And you grab onto it and you chase it and then you do it and you go, right, that's done. And next opportunity. And they fall into your lap. And after a while, it cascades because you get a name and people recognize you. Oh, you do these things. You go, I've got to do them all because they're never going to come back again. And it'll burn you out. And I think I'm learning these days to sort of step back a little bit and trust that if I could build them up once, I can build it up again. And you're going to enjoy what you're doing and not feel as if you're just being snowed under. And so I love the things I've done. I'm so appreciative of the books I've done and just the diverse career I've had. But now that I'm focusing more on just being deputy editor and, settling into that, it frees up that mental time, I think. So definitely yeah, don't do everything at once. Take opportunities, but learn to say no when you get to a certain point as well.
Yeah, and I feel like, so I actually turned down the UNSW job when they offered it to me.
All right, yeah.
And then they came back to me a year later and said, can you do it on a part-time basis remotely? Because I'm based in Adelaide and it's UNSW in Sydney. And I've had a few experiences with that over the years, where if you say no to something in a considered way, especially if you're like, these are the reasons I'm saying no, I really love this opportunity, but these parts of it don't work for me, then people are still potentially going to want to work with you. And they might even be like, okay, well, let's see if we can work towards things that align better. So I'm very much like, I try to have kind of a more like abundant and collaborative mentality around stuff, because I do feel like, sometimes there's this kind of scarcity mentality and this competitive mentality that does kind of, it can be like a race to the bottom, right? In terms of pay, in terms of, you know, opportunities and stuff. So I'm definitely for the idea that actually, if you say no, not in a like burning bridges way, but in a, that sounds like an amazing thing to do. And sometimes it can be like with the Inspiring Australia stuff, like, yeah, I'd love to take a new contract, except you're not going to pay me enough. So that's exactly the reason that I'm going to do this other thing instead. Or, you know, whatever it is, like, that sounds great, but I can't move to Sydney because I have a family in Adelaide. And unless you're going to buy me a 3-bedroom house by the beach in Sydney, you're not paying me enough to relocate, kind of thing. So I do think that it's okay to say no, especially as part of just, you know, pushing back against some of the kind of capitalist, just relentless, you know, stuff that you can get very sucked into. We didn't really get into in this session, but I know in the afternoon session, there was some stuff about, you know, cultures of science and how it doesn't allow people to express, you know, their gender, their sexuality, you know, it excludes a lot of Indigenous ways of thinking. And I think that we can do that ourselves by pushing back against some of those unhealthy, you know, Western capitalist, just work harder and learn more and get more educated and everything needs to be more productive and, you know, consumptive and stuff. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of merit to thinking about things differently.
You're doing great.
I am aware it is right on 7:30, so this is probably the point that some people need to disappear. I'm going to give you that opportunity to head out now if you need to.
Yeah, I need to go and deal with kids as well. But likewise, as to what Duncan said, please, anybody who does want to send me an email, you know, I'm easy to find. Always.
His website, contact him through his website.
Website is the easiest way to find me. McRae27@gmail.com. You know, otherwise, I'm more than happy to offer advice or you know, discuss anything. Just please email.
I'm going to get in touch with you, Mike, about the square kilometre array. Something's coming.
Sweet. All right. Sounds good, Tom.
And likewise, I'm both at Flinders and at UNSW, if you want to email me. But yeah, thank you so much, Joanna and Tom, for making this happen and for your sharing your wisdom as well, Mike, and for participants as well. It was really nice talking to people.
It was nice seeing some of you as well. Well, nice seeing everyone, but nice catching up with some faces as well. So
yeah.
See you guys later.
Bye.
Thank you.